I'd like to welcome everybody. Thank you for attending. I know we have viewers from ILTA, International Legal Technology Association, as well as several PMI members and our GSPM members. So I want to thank you all for coming and joining us tonight after a long day at work. So the first thing I'd like to do is give you a disclaimer about what we're going to talk about today. Being of the legal field, of course, I have to give you a disclaimer. First of all, I'm not an Agile expert. I can't give you the ins and outs of all the Agile methodologies and frameworks. This is not a traditional Agile training, meaning that I'm not going to take you from point A to point Z on any of the Agile frameworks. What I am going to teach you tonight or talk to you about is the THB method. This is a method that I established as a result of going to several Agile trainings and trying to determine how I can apply some Agile methods into a non-developmental environment, right? So the projects that I handle majority of the time are not developmental projects. They are typically implementation projects. We purchase a piece of software and we implement it into our environment. So that's typically what I handle. And so that's what, how or why I created the THB method. This method uses parts of Kanban, Scrum, Lean, and really any Agile framework or methodology. It's taking pieces from each of those. So as you hear things that I'm talking about, it may come from any of those. I encourage you to Google specific pieces as I go over the Agile influences, if you're interested in those particular pieces. But that's how this method was developed. So now that I've gone through all of that, let's talk about the roadmap of this discussion. First, I'm going to go over the problems that I was facing prior to developing this methodology, or what led me to develop this methodology or this method. I'm also going to share with you the Agile inspirations that inspired the, or were inspirations for the Agile pieces. And then I'm going to walk you through an implementation. I'm going to walk you through using the THB method to implement a project. And then overall ending results of what I've noticed since implementing the method. And then we'll open it up for Q&A. Hopefully your head won't have exploded and you'll have some questions for us and we can answer some of those as we go through. So the problems, what were the problems that I was working to address? So one of the main things that I was noticing in our environment is that our project teams were having a lack of holistic focus. And what I mean by that is that when we had a project going, as a project manager, our job is to look at the entire projects and to figure out what needs to come first and to guide our project teams down that schedule or to get the work done. What generally happened, or what I was finding was happening with our teams, is that our teams were made up of several different types of people. So we had the hardware team, we had the applications team, the training team, the help desk or support team, and each of them kind of had their silos, their little groupings of areas that they particularly specialized in or they worked on. So whenever we dealt with the project, they had tunnel vision into whatever it is that they had to work on, right? So they were, I like to think of them as the race horses. You know, when jockeys are going down the lane, they have blinders on their horses. And so the blinders are here and they can't see left or right. They can only focus on what's in front of them. And that's what I was finding was happening with our team. The members were focusing on the work that they were assigned and getting that done, but they didn't really understand or but they didn't understand or think about how their piece of the puzzle affected the whole. So that was one of the things that I was trying to address with this method. Additionally, they were working in silos. not really collaborating with other people, or even when they hit issues or roadblocks, they weren't trying to get assistance from others in the department. They would kind of hold on to that and wait until we came to a project meeting to voice, hey, I have this issue or I need some help. We also were having the issue, and I think all project managers deal with this at some point, is that you are planning at the beginning of a waterfall project at the infancy of the project, right? So you're spending the first couple of weeks or months planning that project out, and you're planning based on unknown information. You just really don't know what's going on in the project. Well, that doesn't sound right, but you don't really know all the ins and outs of what's going to happen on the project. You can guesstimate and say, hey, I'm the SME, I'm the subject matter expert, and I know that typically for our legal people out there, interaction, a typical upgrade is just a step upgrade, and this is what we typically do on those upgrades. Well, let's say you have an upgrade that is actually a rewrite where they've gone in and they've made some major changes with that software. Well, you may not have ever experienced that, but yet you have to plan for it. And so there's a lot of unknowns that could happen with that. And I was finding that although our subject matter experts tried and our technicians were really trying to estimate accurately, there were still so many unknowns that affected the overall schedule. And so things would cause our projects to go off schedule, or we would end up with some major issues that we had to address along the way. We also had people padding, of course, their estimates to account for another team member who underestimates. So they would overestimate. And as the project manager, I'd go in and I try to tweak that a little. But again, that's just throwing all the estimates off. They're all just guesstimates. So lack of team respect was another issue we were trying to address. And this I like to call the busy mentality of, I'm busy. I'm working my fingers to the bone every day. And this person over here on the project team never seems to be busy, never really seems to be interested in the project. And so my job is more important than their job. I give more to the project than they do. A lot of that was going on, and just not respecting teammates for what they bring to the table. And so we were trying to figure out, how can we get this team to work better together? And of course, you do the team building exercises and you talk a great game, but when it came down to actually doing the work and working together in a collaborative fashion, it just wasn't happening. So I was trying to figure out a way to address that within our teams. We were having a lot of unproductive meetings. And when I say unproductive, what I'm meaning is we had our project team meetings. Let's say there's 8 people in the project team. We had our parking lots and we had our agendas. So we were doing everything that we needed to do to try to manage that meeting. And the meetings technically were ran well. The problem is that when our technicians were coming to these meetings and our project team members were coming to the meetings, they were coming unprepared. And they were coming in a way, a lot of times with things that would, again, sideline or disrupt the meeting to lead us down a path that we didn't need to go. And so when that would happen, of course, we'd take that information and put it in the parking lot. But then at the same time, when we left those meetings, those parking lot discussions and these things that maybe a particular member was really adamant about and really focused on, it would become like a little fire in the hallways. They would start talking to somebody and talking about the concerns that they have, and we're really not thinking about this, which may not have been the case. It could be that we're just not focused on that right now, but we were going to get to it later. But what ends up happening is that little fire becomes a wildfire, because you keep, the individual is going from person to person to person, and it becomes this big issue that we have to stop focusing on item A to turn our focus on this wildfire that really doesn't need our attention right now. So that's something that we were really trying to address. And the final thing was lack of user input and where they felt like we really weren't including them in the process of planning and implementing projects. This wasn't necessarily 100% accurate, but it was the perception of not feeling included. So those were all pretty much the issues. It's a lot, or it seems like a lot, but those are the issues that I was really focused on trying to address. So what are the Agile pieces that inspired this method that I'm going to share with you today? Well, one is the sprint, the increments of time. A sprint is basically taking an increment of time, and it could be whatever time your organization determines. I typically use a 2 to 4 week period of time. I find longer than 4 weeks is too much. Under 2 weeks on most of the projects I run is not enough time. So 2 to 4 weeks seems like a pretty good time frame. So that was one piece. Deliverables to the client. And we have deliverables in the waterfall methodology, the waterfall, but what I'm talking about is having, I like to call it a package, right? A present that you can deliver to your sponsor or that you can deliver to your users. This is something that they can actually touch, feel, play with, give their input on. So these are little presents that you can deliver at the end of a sprint. Stand-up meetings. This is something that basically the concept behind stand-up meeting is that you have 15 minutes a day that you bring your project team together. Technically, you're supposed to be in the same room or in a circle, and the focus on this is answering 3 key questions. One is, what have you completed since our last meeting? The second question is, what are you going to work on next? And the third question is, what issue or impediment do you have that you need assistance on resolving? So those 3 questions are really the key that I gravitated to. The stand-up meeting, it's interesting and I feel there's worth there, but I really gravitated to the 3 questions that were asked during the stand-up meeting. Another inspiration is the product backlog. And I'm not going to go too far into this right now, but ultimately this is I like to call it a bucket because I'm the happiness bucket, right? But it's a bucket of issues and features that you are pulling from to develop your product, right? So that's like the home base, and you're pulling everything from that to do the work. So we'll get more into that in a few minutes. User stories. This is another way that in the Agile framework that you can determine what features you're going to implement or how the features need to be used. And it goes into some specifics on how the user stories are developed. I'm not going to get into that now, but just the idea of the user story really intrigued me, right? And then just the transparency, running a transparent project so that basically nothing's hidden. If you want to know what's going on, we're able to show you. It makes people feel like, they're not hiding anything. A lot of times with projects, they feel like we're hiding information or we're not telling them the full story. So just having transparency, I felt was really important. So those are the inspirations that I used to develop the methodology. So now we're going to talk about the actual method, right? So I'm going to take you from the start to the end, and hopefully I'm not going to go too fast and you'll kind of understand where I'm going with this. So the first thing, once my manager gives me a project, he says, hey, you know what, we are going to start this project and I really want you to go ahead and have the kickoff meeting. So once that conversation is had and I find out, what are the requirements, is there a deadline, the typical project management things you do with your sponsor when you are given a project. The next step that I take is that I contact the vendor project manager. And if for some reason the vendor does not have a project manager, you would contact their technical lead or whoever your point person is with that resource or with that vendor. You would reach out to them and ask for a copy of their project plan or their project schedule. I have not had a time that they have not had one, right? So they'll send that to you, and then you ask for a meeting. So typically this is all done via email, and I just say, hey, I'd like to meet with you, schedule a meeting with you for about an hour, 30 minutes to an hour to talk about the project and kind of next steps. And I'd also like to get a copy of your project plan. That's pretty much the verbiage that is sent. So once I receive that project plan, I take it and I overlay it with our internal methodology. We do use a planning, design, implementation, and closing methodology within our environment. And there's certain things that we just do on every project. We always have a pilot group, be that red, yellow, and green. We use a stoplight approach. So we do implement that somewhere between the design and the implementation phase on all of our projects. We always have a train the trainer. We always have a train the support team, transfer knowledge there prior to implementation, and then again afterwards. So these are things that are already plugged into our project plan. So I layered their project plan on top of that and try to figure out where I think the organic breaks are in that project schedule. So if I'm looking at it and I say, okay, you got to build the server, they're going to install the software, that to me is a clear break, because if that's not done, we can't move on to configuration. We can't move on to training in the system, right? So those are what I mean by organic breaks. You know that training is going to be pretty much developing the training materials is going to be a piece that we need to work on. Building the package is a piece that is going to have to be worked on. So you know kind of where those breaks organically fall within your environment. So once we meet with the vendor project manager, we then, I just want to make sure this doesn't end on me. We then have a conversation with them and we talk to them about how do they flow through their project. How does a typical implementation for their environment fall? How does it run? And so as they're walking through that process, you are verifying where those organic breaks are. And you kind of have that just discussion, open discussion with their PM. You let them know you're working on in a sprint format, a hybrid, agile, waterfall method. And typically they're going to know kind of what you're talking about. Let them know that what your increment of time is, 2 to 4 weeks, but we're shooting towards the 2-week period. And then you start breaking the schedule down. And I will warn you that occasionally you may get some pushback from the vendor saying, oh, we typically like to get all of this information all at once. Perfect example is a vendor wanted a data worksheet from us for this new product that we are implementing. And we had a product in place that we were replacing, but the new product had a lot of additional features that we didn't currently use. So we could provide them with the initial information first, but we needed more time to get the secondary information. So for me, an organic break would be in between those two pieces. We give them what we could, and then as we go through and get the rest of the information, we send that later or configure the system with that information later. The vendor wanted that data sheet all together. And I said, that's going to delay the project way too long. Let's not do that. I'd rather do it in 2 separate pieces. So ultimately, you're the client. So don't feel bad about pushing back against what they're used to doing, because their job is to get the project done as quickly as possible so they can move on to their next client. Your job is to get it implemented correctly, on schedule, in a successful way for your environment. So make sure that you stand up for yourself on that particular thing. So, okay, we've had this meeting with the project manager, and it's time for the kickoff meeting. So typically when I schedule the kickoff meeting, I send all of the information. I send the schedule, the sprint schedule is what I call it. I send that out. And note, on this schedule, there are no dates, right? There are no dates. There may be dates on the first sprint, but other than that, there are no dates on the schedule. I know, bear with me here. So once you send that out, you let them know they need to review this schedule and let you know if anything is missing out of it, if they see any major flaws with the way the schedule is built out. You also let them know to please come to the meeting ready to discuss it. ready to discuss that schedule. That is key. So we have the meeting. It's the day of the kickoff meeting. Of course, go through all of the normal administrative project management stuff that you typically go through. But then the next thing that you want to do is you want to discuss your sprints. You want to let them know what that time frame is. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is between having this discussion with the project manager from the vendor and this kickoff meeting, you have met with the sponsor. And you let that sponsor know, hey, based on my discussions with the project manager from the vendor, we are looking at this project taking X number of sprints. And I'm going to use the number 5 just because of a recent project that that's what the sprint number was. So I see that there's 5 sprints that we are going to have for this project. And so my guesstimate is that, or I anticipate this project will last 10 weeks. And where did I get 10 weeks from? 5 sprints times 2. 10 weeks. That's the minimum amount that this project is going to take. And the maximum is going to be what? 4 times 5. That's 20. So he knows that anywhere between 10 and 20 weeks, this project will be done. So my question to the sponsor is this okay? Are you okay with it going possibly 20 weeks? Do I need to bring that back to 15 weeks? What, where are you on this? I have never had him say, okay, no, we've got to make it shorter. Usually by me giving him that clear, definitive time frame, generally he is fine with that. So fast forward kickoff meeting, let them know the sprint time frame is 2 to 4 weeks. I'll let them know our sprints currently are set at a 2-week interval. The only reason why we would go to the 4 weeks is if we run into a problem. That's kind of our built-in extra time, right? Or if they reviewed the schedule and determined, hey, I think all this needs to be done together, but I'd like to make this particular sprint 4 weeks. An example of that is testing, if you're going through a big testing period. But I also like to do checks at 2 weeks. We may do testing over a 4-week period of time, but after the first 2 weeks, I like to do a touch base with the project team to say, where are we? How are things going? So during this kickoff meeting, we also review the schedule. Again, the schedule has no dates other than possibly the first sprint. And it's just looking at the tasks at hand. Where are the organic breaks? Where have I broken the schedule up? And are these breaks in the right place? Do they have any concerns of something missing from the schedule?
Hi, Dana.
Yes.
I have a question. I think you may have answered it. Somebody shot in a question. You're talking about a schedule with no dates. Is that the same as a task list? Or is it a list that shows dependencies like the WBS?
Think of it as like a broken down WBS. It can have dependencies, but what I found with the sprint format is that dependencies, they just happen, right? You don't. With the waterfall, you kind of like, you cannot start this until this is done. But with the sprint format, you know that sprint 2 can't start before sprint 1 is done, period. So that's where you would put those dependencies. You would break it down within the sprints. So hopefully that answered your question. I have some more information that may clarify that a little more in just a second. So as far as the dates for the first sprint, this is why I say sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. Sometimes after I've met with the project manager, especially if I know that they've told me, hey, we have some time available on this date or what have you to get this implemented or whatever the case may be, I may go to the technician that's involved in that first sprint and ask them, is this date okay with you to do X, Y, Z? So sometimes I have the task for sprint 1 already figured out because I've already discussed those with those involved in that sprint. Other times I like to do that within the first meeting, the kickoff meeting. And the reason for that is I want to use that as an example to the rest of the project team for the rest of the sprints. So it really just depends on if you are new at this. I would say it would be helpful to do it within the meeting. That way they see kind of the format of how you're deciding what the dates are and how all that's determined. But it's really up to you. Doing it ahead of time kind of sets the tone, so those people who started know how important their job is, and so they're able to say, yes, I've already got it figured out, and we're good to go. I've also had a situation where the technician went ahead and started the work before the kickoff meeting. And so when I announced, okay, this is the next sprint, he said, oh, we're good to go on that. It's already built. So we were already ahead of schedule before the kickoff meeting actually started. So then I discussed the project log, and this is something that is huge. This is the same as the product log. I just call it the project log, and there's a reason behind that. I'll explain in a second. The project log is basically the big bucket where everything is dumped. Anything that is not currently being done in the first sprint is basically it's theoretically on hold, meaning my focus, the project team's focus, everybody's focus is on getting the tasks done that are in the first sprint. Anything in the additional sprints or the sprints that come after that, can they work on them? Yes. Are they a priority? No. Can they ask questions about them, kind of research them? Yes, yes, and yes. If there are questions about those items, they are supposed to put those in the project log. Any questions, any issues, any suggestions, any training discussions, any questions for the vendor, all of those things go to the project log. And we just have kind of within hours, we have a definitive, we have a place in there where we can say, okay, this is a training question, or this is an issue, or, we can break them down that way. But the project log is where basically everything is going, and it's the one-stop shop. Okay, so let me fast forward and talk about the sprint meetings, right? I talked to you about the stand-up meetings, and we call them sprint meetings. And our main meetings are called sprint meetings, and then I'm going to talk about the stand-up meetings. Okay, so you don't typically have, or for us, we don't typically have a sprint meeting for every sprint. I do put that in the schedule. So one of the last things before the end of each sprint, you will have two lines. One will say PM update or PM connection, and the other one will be a status update. And the reason why I don't call that a status meeting is because sometimes between sprints, we don't have a meeting. It just depends on what's going on. So let's say that sprint 1, we were building the server, installing the software, and that's all we did in sprint 1. Well, when it gets time to go to sprint 2, what is the next task, or what is sprint 2 about? It's all about training. So do I really need to have a meeting to say, hey, we're ready for sprint 2, and we're going to start having our training meetings? That's not necessary. So basically at that point, after we know that the server is ready and we can schedule these training meetings, I just send a communication to the team to say, hey, we've completed sprint 1 successfully. We are now moving on to sprint 2. In the following days, you're going to see a number of meeting requests for the training. These are trainings, blah, 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 blah. Please make sure that you clear your schedule to attend these. Like, that's how we deal with the status updates. On some sprints, we actually do have a meeting. Sometimes that's again, at that status update period, if I determine, okay, it's time for us to really get into configuring the system, so I need to meet with the team that's going to help make those decisions, then I have a meeting and I announce that to the team and say, hey, we're ready for the next step, what have you. So what I found with this method is that our project team meetings actually have reduced from, say, an hour, hour and a half to 30 minutes, because they're so focused in, and you don't have a lot of this extra noise in your meetings and getting off focus and all of that, because they have the project log. So they're dumping all those extra things and that extra noise in the project log. So when we come to a meeting, we can just deal with what we're supposed to be dealing with in that meeting. Now, the stand-up meetings, those are actually have organically moved to our technicians. They've just kind of taken it up on themselves to create these stand-up meetings on their own. So if you're part of a sprint, what typically happens is you're dealing with issue A, right? And you're working on that, and you've hit a roadblock, or you've gotten stuck on something. So now our technicians get up, and whoever else is on that sprint, they go to that person, they say, hey, I'm having this problem. Are you having the same problem, or can you help me with this? So they're kind of having a stand-up meeting on their own in between our other typical project stuff. So I'm not leading these stand-up meetings. I'm not really involved. Sometimes they'll have them over to the side, and then they'll come and come to me later and say, hey, we had this issue. This is what we kind of talked about. This is what we came up with. Are you okay with it? I'm like, hey, go for it. I'm good, you know. So the team is collaborating and working together, not in silos anymore. And we're moving forward and not waiting for meetings to announce issues or to try to get everybody's feedback on it. It's the key people that are part of that sprint that are involved in those discussions. If it is something that needs the entire team's input, then we do schedule a meeting and try to do that. But we haven't had many issues that are like that where we've needed to have the full-blown meetings. So let's talk about tools. This is really not all that important, but I always get that question, so I want to address it here. We internally use Smartsheet. Smartsheet is like Excel on crack, right? You have your typical Excel formatted sheet, but the main difference with this is that you have the ability to collaborate with people. So you can share the sheet out to people within your environment and also people external to your environment. So for every sheet I create, we share it with our vendors, so they have direct access to it. And any of their resources that they want to have access to the sheet, we also, share it with them. You have the ability to add attachments to a line item as well as notes in there, and then at the end of the day, or you have the ability to set notifications on your sheet. So the way that I typically do it is at the end of the day, any changes that have happened to that sheet throughout the day get emailed to anybody who I've set up in the system. And ultimately, anybody I share that sheet with gets that notification. The beauty of this is that you don't have to be part of that sprint to know what's going on. You don't have to be open. You don't have to open the project log every day or get in there and review it every day, because you're going to get a summary of the changes that happen in that sheet each morning. So I typically, because I work on several projects, so in the morning I'll look at my email, I'll see the summary, I'll run through it, and then if there's anything that jumps out or I need to respond to, then I'll log in and respond. But ultimately, I can stay up to date on the project without doing anything else. And that's one thing that our technicians really love about that program, is that they don't have to do anything extra. It also adds a window in for our sponsors, our sponsors boss. We add them as well. Pretty much anybody who wants to be added to the sheet, we add them as a viewer so that they can see into it. For every project that we set up, I set up 3 individual sheets. And I should say for everyone, I set up 2 and a possible 3rd. So the first thing, of course, is the project schedule, or the plan, the sprint schedule is set up. Then I also set up a sheet that is the project log. I've kind of explained that. I don't really know if I need to go into that deeper. If I do, post a question and let me know. And then the third thing that I set up is a user log. So you have your project log, which is for the project team. And then you have your user log, which is for your users. So what the main difference about this user log is, we have the ability to create a form, and it's just a clean form that you would see on any website that has those basic questions. What is your name? What is the item, item description, issue or suggestion, and then some notes. Give us some details about what this is. They also can upload screenshots, attachments, anything that will help us address the issue or fix the system so it can do what they're wanting to do. So they have access to that. That is added to a project page that we set up for the project, and that goes directly into this sheet. So I can segment out what are issues or suggestions or questions that our project team has from the ones that our users have. And I can respond directly to our users and give them the answers to their questions, ask more details, also know if I can add them to a project, a pilot list. It's just giving us some interaction with the users. And so then finally, the deliverable, right? So you've gone through all this sprint detail. You're on sprint 3, you're on sprint 4. What about the deliverables? Well, typically with the sprint breakdown, you have a clear deliverable at the end. And I'm not talking about the deliverables like in Waterfall where you're like, okay, your deliverable is to build the server out, or your deliverable, to complete this design worksheet. The deliverables I'm talking about are tangible things that you can say, okay, this is what we have now. It's showing forward movement, right? It's not just checking something off a list, it's forward movement. So using a current project I'm working on, the first tangible thing was to get the server, the server built, the software installed, and the basic information inputted and configured into that system. So technically we had a working system. And if we needed to, we could have given people access to that to kind of play around and see what questions they have. For our ILTA members, I will talk about our recent document management. I'll call it an upgrade, but it was basically we were moving from DM to net documents. And so that was a complete different program, right? So one was internally housed and one was cloud-based. So it was a complete process change for our users. Everything was completely different, nothing we had ever done before. And so one of the key pictures of this deliverable that I can give you is once we got the system configured and to a point where the website was working, because with the program you have the web access piece, and you also have an Outlook access piece. So as soon as the web piece was available, we then set up a demo, kind of like your showrooms at any conference you've gone to. We set up a demo for our users, and they were, I want to say 45 minutes to an hour apart, and I think we did 3. And we offered food, of course, but we set these demos up and we invited our users down, and they did not touch it. It was our trainers walking through how the system worked, right? And it was very high level, but they kind of showed to give an introduction to our users. We took questions and we let them know, hey, we may not know the answer to these questions, but we want to give you a window into what is coming and to get some feedback from you guys. At the same session, after the trainer went through her 15-20 minute spiel, then they have the opportunity to go to the service team, or kind of like the Apple Store where you have the bar set up and people come and actually play with the product. Well, they would come over and ask me, for example, how do I do this in the system? Am I going to be able to do this? And I could answer that question or show them that how to do it. Or I say, you know what, I don't know yet, but I'm going to take your question down, and as soon as we know, I'm going to get back with you and make sure that it's meeting your needs. So this is what we did, and what we found is after that first session, which wasn't well attended, the very first one, well, those people went back to their desk and said, hey, are you going to that next session? It looks pretty cool, you may want to go down. So the second session got more people there. We actually had some timekeepers there. That's attorneys for those who are not in the legal field. So attorneys came down and actually stayed to watch the demo and ask a couple of questions. And by the third demo that day, we were in a standing room only situation. People were flooding the room to try to figure out what this new product was. So that was the first deliverable. That was the first thing we showed. Well, a month later, we had the Outlook piece. So we did the exact same thing. All 3 sessions were well attended. And then the third time that we did it, And I want to say that was about a month later. We actually had the full system in place, and we let them come down to an open lab and let them just play and ask questions. This helped take the edge off of the rollout. It helped them feel at ease with the product. They were anxious for the product. So it got to a point where they were like, when is it coming? When is it coming? And we were like, okay, we got a little more time. We've got to do a couple more things. But they wanted the product. It was not us pushing the product on them. So that's what the power of those deliverables at the end of each sprint, what that does for your project. So that's pretty much the method. Let's talk about the ending results that I have noticed in implementing this method. Number one, of course, I've already mentioned it, our team meetings are shorter. They last anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes. I do still from time to time schedule them for an hour so that our team, because what I found is that our team will deal with the issues, but then we'll kind of sit and have kind of an informal team building there, because we crack jokes, people are more relaxed, they enjoy being around each other. So that is one thing that we noticed. They respect one another. They're very anxious to get feedback from each other. Although they still work independently at times, because I feel like that's needed at times, they also work in teams very easily and openly without being pushed to do so. I don't see silos anymore. I don't see people going off to the corner and not communicating with the team. We have teammates that have nothing to do with whatever the sprint is offering to help. For example, we had a technician that had to implement some screens in our conference center, and he had to go to each one, programming it separately. Well, we had our facilities person come and say, hey, I can help you implement those screens. You just tell me what you need me to do, and I will do it. That's what I'm talking about the teamwork and the collaboration that comes out of this. Our deadlines, we were meeting those consistently. And we were actually finishing projects early. People were happy that we were rolling things out. And there was no longer that pushback from our users about, I hate this, we don't want this product. So our user acceptance was higher. And there were less issues when we finally rolled products out, because we had dealt with the issues early on, because we gave the users early ability to see the product. So that is pretty much it. I know I talked really fast, but I wanted to get through the content and open the floor for questions.